Far from the safety of city streets, there are places where silence can shatter in an instant. In these rugged landscapes, sudden chaos erupts when strength and instinct collide with human fragility. One moment may bring laughter, the next, panic. From remote campsites deep in Russia's Amur forests to quiet town gatherings in Vermont, and from icy Arctic villages to cattle ranches in Kazakhstan, each account reveals how quickly the unexpected can turn deadly. In this video, we'll uncover 6 chilling encounters that you won't forget. The Amur River region of southeastern Russia had always been known for its untamed wilderness and sprawling taiga forests that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. In September 2025, the remote Zeleny Bor RV park sat nestled among towering birch and pine trees, approximately 40 kilometers from the nearest settlement of Blagoveshchensk. The campground had been established in 2019 as an eco-tourism venture, designed to offer adventurous travelers a chance to experience Russia's pristine wilderness while maintaining basic modern amenities. The park's location had been carefully chosen for its scenic beauty, positioned along a bend in a tributary stream where moose and deer frequently came to drink. However, this same proximity to wildlife corridors would prove catastrophic on the night of September 5th. Recent logging operations upstream had displaced numerous animal populations, forcing them into unfamiliar territory as they searched for new food sources and shelter. Mikhail Volkov, a 43-year-old construction foreman from Vladivostok, had arrived at the park 3 days earlier with his family for what was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. His wife, Svetlana, and their 2 teenage children occupied a modest travel trailer positioned near the center of the campground. Nearby, other families had set up similar arrangements, creating a small community of urban dwellers seeking respite from city life. The evening of September 4th had passed without incident. Campers gathered around a communal fire pit, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows while children played games in the fading daylight. Park manager Dmitry Kozlov reminded visitors about proper food storage protocols, emphasizing the importance of securing all edibles in bear-proof containers. However, several campers had grown complacent during their stay, leaving coolers and garbage bags outside their RVs overnight. At approximately 1:45 a.m. on September 5th, a massive male Eurasian brown bear, weighing an estimated 350 kilograms, emerged from the forest tree line. The animal had been tracking the scent of improperly stored food for several hours, drawn by the aroma of leftover barbecue and discarded fruit peels. Initial forensic analysis would later reveal that the bear had been wandering for days without adequate nutrition, as its usual feeding grounds had been disrupted by industrial activity. The first victim was elderly pensioner Boris Petrov, who stepped outside his RV to investigate strange noises near his vehicle. The 71-year-old retired teacher encountered the massive predator just meters from his door. Witnesses later reported hearing his terrified shouts before they were abruptly silenced. The bear's initial attack triggered a chain reaction of panic throughout the small campground. Galina Morozova, a 38-year-old nurse camping with her sister's family, described hearing the first screams and initially assuming someone was having a nightmare. When the sounds intensified and were joined by the distinctive roar of an enraged bear, she realized the gravity of the situation. She quickly gathered her 2 young nephews and barricaded themselves inside their RV's bathroom, the smallest and most secure space available. The bear's rampage continued as it moved methodically through the campground, its massive claws tearing through tent fabric and aluminum siding with terrifying ease. Viktor Semenov, a 45-year-old mechanic from Khabarovsk, attempted to start his truck's engine to create noise and scare off the animal. However, the vehicle failed to turn over, leaving him trapped as the bear approached his location. Yelena Volkov, Mikhail's 19-year-old daughter, managed to climb onto the roof of their trailer when the bear began investigating their campsite. From her elevated position, she witnessed the animal's methodical destruction of neighboring campsites, its powerful jaws crushing metal coolers and scattering contents across the forest floor. She remained motionless for nearly 20 minutes, watching in horror as the predator continued its deadly path. The attack claimed 6 lives in total. Boris Petrov, Viktor Semenov, married couple Ivan and Nadezhda Kuznetsov from Irkutsk, and 2 brothers Alexei and Dmitry Popov, who had been camping in a large tent near the stream. Each victim suffered massive trauma consistent with bear attacks, including crushing injuries and severe lacerations from the animal's claws and teeth. Survivors credited their escape to various factors. Some, like Galina Morozova and her nephews, found secure hiding places and remained completely still until dawn. Others, including park manager Dmitry Kozlov, managed to start vehicle engines and create enough noise to deter the bear from their immediate vicinity eventually. The animal finally retreated into the forest around 4:15 a.m., apparently satisfied with the food it had scavenged during its rampage. Emergency responders arrived at first light, having been alerted by satellite phone calls from survivors. The scene they encountered was described as devastating. Overturned RVs, shredded camping equipment, and clear evidence of the massive bear's presence in the form of deep claw marks on trees and metal surfaces. Regional wildlife authorities immediately closed the campground and initiated an extensive search for the responsible animal. The incident prompted emergency meetings between tourism officials and conservation experts, leading to stricter regulations regarding food storage in wilderness camping areas. Within weeks, new protocols were implemented requiring mandatory bear safety courses for all visitors to remote camping facilities. The survivors struggled with lasting psychological trauma from their experience. Galina Morozova reportedly required months of counseling before she could sleep without nightmares about that terrifying night in the Russian wilderness. The tragic incident served as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between human recreation and wildlife preservation in Russia's vast, untamed territories. The picturesque town of Millbrook, Vermont, nestled in the Green Mountains about 25 kilometers southeast of Montpelier, had been hosting outdoor community events for over 3 decades. The town's central green, established in 1847, served as the heart of local gatherings throughout the warmer months. Surrounded by historic colonial homes and century-old maple trees, the area had become synonymous with wholesome family entertainment and small-town American charm. On September 2nd, 2023, approximately 60 residents gathered on blankets and folding chairs for the monthly outdoor movie screening, a tradition that had begun in 1995. The evening featured a classic family film projected onto a large portable screen positioned against the backdrop of the town's historic white church. Children ran freely across the grass while parents unpacked elaborate picnic spreads, creating an atmosphere of relaxed community fellowship. Amanda Brooks, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher who had moved to Millbrook 2 years prior from Boston, arrived with her 7-year-old daughter Emma and a large cooler filled with homemade popcorn and candy. She had volunteered to help coordinate refreshments for the event, a role that would ultimately place her directly in harm's way. Amanda had chosen a spot near the front of the gathering, wanting Emma to have an unobstructed view of the screen. The surrounding area had experienced an unusually dry summer, forcing local wildlife to venture closer to human settlements in search of food and water sources. Black bears, typically shy creatures that avoided human contact, had been spotted with increasing frequency in residential neighborhoods throughout central Vermont. Wildlife officials had issued warnings about securing garbage and avoiding outdoor food storage, but many residents had grown complacent about the relatively rare bear encounters. As darkness fell and the movie began, families settled into their viewing positions, sharing snacks and enjoying the crisp autumn evening. The film's opening scenes played without incident, accompanied by the gentle sounds of children's laughter and the quiet chatter of adults among themselves. Several families had brought elaborate refreshment setups, including multiple coolers filled with ice cream, sodas, and various packaged snacks. At approximately 9:20 p.m., during a particularly quiet dialogue scene in the movie, a rustling sound emerged from the maple trees bordering the eastern edge of the green. Initially dismissed as wind or perhaps a curious cat, the noise gradually intensified until it became clear that something substantial was moving through the underbrush. A large adult black bear, estimated to weigh approximately 140 kilograms, emerged from the tree line and began approaching the gathered families. The animal moved with deliberate purpose toward the collection of coolers and food containers scattered throughout the viewing area. Its keen sense of smell had detected the abundance of sweet treats and packaged snacks from a considerable distance. The bear showed no immediate aggression, appearing more interested in investigating potential food sources than confronting the human occupants of the space. However, the situation escalated rapidly when several children noticed the approaching animal and began screaming in terror. The sudden cacophony of frightened voices and scrambling bodies triggered a defensive response from the bear, which had likely never encountered such a large gathering of humans in its territory. Parents frantically grabbed their children while others attempted to collect their belongings and retreat to nearby vehicles. Amanda Brooks found herself directly in the bear's path as it approached her family's prime viewing location. Remembering advice from wilderness safety courses, she grabbed a powerful LED flashlight from her emergency kit and began waving it toward the animal while shouting. Her strategy initially appeared successful, causing the bear to pause and reassess the situation. Unfortunately, the bear's attention quickly shifted to Amanda's large cooler, which contained an assortment of sweet treats that proved irresistible. As the animal began tearing into the container, Amanda made the critical decision to intervene physically, hoping to prevent the bear from becoming more aggressive or becoming accustomed to human food sources. She approached the feeding bear and attempted to distract it by banging metal objects together. The bear, startled by Amanda's proximity and the sudden noise, swiped defensively with its powerful front paw. The claws connected with Amanda's left forearm, creating 3 parallel gashes approximately 8 centimeters long, which required immediate medical attention. The injury was painful but not life-threatening, serving primarily as a warning rather than a serious attack. Community members responded quickly to the crisis. Several men began honking car horns while others threw folding chairs and other objects toward the bear, creating enough commotion to convince the animal to retreat. The entire encounter lasted approximately 8 minutes before the bear disappeared back into the forest, leaving behind scattered snacks and overturned furniture. Amanda received 15 stitches at the local medical center and recovered fully within several weeks. The incident prompted town officials to implement new safety protocols for outdoor events, including mandatory guidelines for food storage and the presence of wildlife control officers during evening gatherings. The monthly movie nights continued, but with significantly enhanced safety measures and reduced food offerings. Kodiak Island, located in the Gulf of Alaska approximately 50 kilometers southwest of the Alaskan mainland, represented one of North America's most pristine wilderness areas. The island's rugged coastline, characterized by dramatic cliffs and isolated beaches, provided crucial nesting habitat for thousands of seabirds during the summer breeding season. In June 2024, this remote location would become the setting for a near-fatal encounter between humans and one of the continent's most formidable predators. The island had been home to massive brown bears for millennia, with some specimens weighing in at over 450 kilograms. These enormous predators typically focused their attention on salmon runs and berry patches, rarely encountering humans due to the area's isolation. However, the intersection of wildlife documentary filming and natural bear behavior would create a perfect storm of circumstances on June 21st. Kyle Reynolds, a 38-year-old sound engineer from Portland, Oregon, had joined an independent documentary crew attempting to capture footage of nesting puffins and other seabirds for an environmental conservation film. The production team, led by director Sarah Martinez, had obtained permits to work in the area for 2 weeks, establishing a temporary base camp on a secluded beach accessible only by seaplane. The crew's methodology involved using strategic bait placement to attract seabirds closer to their camera positions, a technique that would prove catastrophically misguided. Fish scraps and other organic materials were positioned in areas that provided optimal lighting and background composition for filming. However, these same attractants created an irresistible scent trail that drew far more dangerous wildlife than intended. On the morning of June 21st, the weather conditions appeared ideal for filming, with clear skies and minimal wind, creating perfect conditions for capturing aerial footage of the nesting colonies. The crew had established multiple camera positions along the beach, with Kyle responsible for managing audio equipment and monitoring sound levels throughout the various shooting locations. The team had been working since dawn, successfully capturing several hours of high-quality footage featuring various seabird species engaged in typical nesting behaviors. Their confidence grew as the morning progressed, with crew members becoming increasingly comfortable in the remote environment, despite occasional reminders about the presence of large predators in the area. At approximately 11:30 a.m., while Kyle was adjusting microphone positions near a cluster of bait buckets, a massive male Kodiak bear emerged from the dunes behind the filming location. The animal, weighing an estimated 400 kilograms, had been tracking the scent of fish remains for several hours before locating the source of the attractive odors. The bear's initial approach appeared cautious and investigative rather than aggressive. However, when Kyle noticed the approaching predator and instinctively reached for a nearby equipment case, the situation escalated rapidly. The sudden movement triggered the bear's predatory instincts, transforming a curious investigation into a full-scale charge. Kyle attempted to use the heavy metal equipment case as both shield and weapon, swinging it toward the approaching bear in hopes of deterring the attack. The strategy proved ineffective against such a massive and determined predator. The bear's powerful front paw struck the case and Kyle simultaneously, sending him tumbling across the rocky beach surface. The animal's massive jaws clamped down on Kyle's left forearm, crushing through jacket material and penetrating deep into muscle tissue. The bear's teeth, designed for processing tough salmon flesh, created devastating puncture wounds, while its powerful jaw muscles applied crushing pressure to bones and tendons. Kyle's screams echoed across the remote beach as the attack intensified. The bear's claws, each measuring over 10 centimeters in length, raked across Kyle's chest and shoulder area, tearing through clothing and creating deep lacerations across his upper torso. The combination of bite and claw injuries created multiple trauma sites requiring immediate medical intervention. Crew members responded to Kyle's screams with a mixture of panic and improvised defensive measures. Several team members began hurling rocks and pieces of driftwood at the attacking bear, while others searched for emergency flares and bear deterrent spray. The chaotic response initially intensified the bear's aggressive behavior rather than deterring it. Director Sarah Martinez managed to locate and deploy a canister of bear spray, creating a cloud of irritating capsaicin that finally convinced the animal to release Kyle and retreat toward the dunes. The entire attack lasted approximately 3 minutes but resulted in life-threatening injuries requiring immediate evacuation. Kyle remained conscious, but was losing significant amounts of blood from multiple wound sites. Crew members applied improvised tourniquets using camera straps and clothing, while establishing emergency satellite communication with rescue services. The remote location complicated evacuation efforts, requiring coordination between Coast Guard helicopters and medical personnel. The helicopter evacuation occurred 4 hours after the attack, with Kyle receiving emergency medical treatment during the flight to Anchorage. He survived the encounter but required extensive reconstructive surgery and months of rehabilitation. The documentary project was immediately abandoned, and new regulations were implemented regarding wildlife filming techniques in sensitive bear habitats. The Selkirk Mountains of southeastern British Columbia stretched across some of Canada's most rugged wilderness, where railway lines carved narrow corridors through dense forests and steep canyon walls. In September 2022, this remote region became the scene of a tragic encounter between industrial progress and untamed nature. The Canadian Pacific Railway's Mountain Division had been operating through this territory since 1885, but the challenges of maintaining tracks in bear country remained as dangerous as ever. The maintenance section near Revelstoke had experienced an increase in wildlife encounters throughout the summer months, largely due to frequent grain spills from passing freight trains. Wheat, corn, and other agricultural products were regularly scattered along the tracks, creating an unintended feeding ground that attracted deer, elk, and eventually the predators that hunted them. Railway workers had grown accustomed to occasional bear sightings, treating them as routine occupational hazards rather than serious threats. Daniel Chu, a 44-year-old track maintenance supervisor from Vancouver, had been working the mountain railways for over 15 years. His crew of 6 men was responsible for inspecting and repairing a 30-kilometer section of track that wound through some of the most spectacular and dangerous terrain in the Canadian Rockies. Their work often took them miles from the nearest road, accessible only by speeder cars that ran along the rails. On September 7th, the crew was dispatched to repair a section of damaged rail approximately 25 kilometers east of Revelstoke, where recent heavy rains had caused erosion problems beneath the trackbed. The location sat deep in a narrow canyon where towering evergreen trees created a tunnel-like environment that limited visibility and muffled sounds. Wildlife corridors intersected the railway at multiple points, creating natural pathways for animals moving between feeding and denning areas. The morning work proceeded normally, with crew members using hydraulic jacks and replacement ties to address the track stability issues. Daniel supervised the operation while monitoring radio communications with dispatch, ensuring that no trains would enter their work zone during the repair process. The relative isolation of their location meant that help was hours away in the event of an emergency. Recent freight traffic had been particularly heavy through the area, with grain trains bound for Pacific ports passing through multiple times daily. A derailment 3 weeks earlier had scattered thousands of pounds of wheat and barley across a half-kilometer stretch of track, creating an abundant food source that had attracted numerous wildlife species. Despite cleanup efforts, significant quantities of grain remained scattered in the surrounding forest. At approximately 2:15 p.m., while the crew was focused on replacing a damaged rail section, a massive grizzly bear emerged from the tree line approximately 50 meters up the track. The animal, weighing an estimated 350 kilograms, had been feeding on spilled grain in the area for several weeks, and had become accustomed to the regular presence of trains and maintenance equipment. Crew member Robert Singh was the first to notice the approaching bear and immediately alerted his colleagues. The workers initially attempted standard deterrent measures, including shouting and banging tools against metal equipment to create noise. However, the bear showed no fear of these sounds, having become habituated to similar noises from passing trains. The situation deteriorated rapidly when the bear began moving directly toward the work crew, rather than retreating into the forest. Daniel Chu decided to climb onto a nearby rail car that had been positioned for equipment storage, hoping to gain elevation and avoid confrontation with the animal. Several other crew members followed his lead, scrambling up maintenance ladders. However, the bear's determination to investigate the area proved stronger than expected. The animal approached Daniel's position and began attempting to climb the rail car, using its massive claws to gain purchase on the metal surface. Despite weighing over 300 kilograms, grizzly bears were capable climbers, and this particular animal demonstrated remarkable persistence in pursuing its target. Daniel lost his grip on the ladder rungs as the bear reached his position, falling backward onto the gravel ballast that supported the railway ties. The impact left him momentarily stunned and unable to escape as the massive predator descended upon him. The bear's initial bite targeted Daniel's thigh, with powerful jaws crushing through muscle and potentially fracturing the femur. Crew members responded desperately to their supervisor's predicament, hurling heavy steel tools at the attacking bear. Track foreman Miguel Santos managed to strike the animal in the head with a large wrench, but the impact only intensified the bear's aggressive behavior rather than deterring it. The enraged predator shifted its attack to Daniel's abdomen, inflicting devastating injuries. The attack continued for several minutes despite the crew's frantic efforts to drive off the bear. Daniel's cries for help gradually weakened as he suffered massive blood loss from multiple wound sites. The combination of crushing bite injuries and claw lacerations proved fatal, despite the crew's attempts to provide first aid. The bear finally retreated when a passing freight train's emergency horn blared repeatedly as the engineer attempted to assist the maintenance crew. The locomotive's diesel engines and massive air horns created enough noise to convince the animal to withdraw into the forest, leaving Daniel's lifeless body among the scattered tools and equipment. Emergency responders required over 3 hours to reach the remote location, arriving by helicopter due to the lack of road access. Daniel's death shocked the railway community and prompted immediate reviews of safety protocols for workers in bear country. New regulations require bear deterrent spray and emergency communication devices for all maintenance crews working in wilderness areas. Tuktoyaktuk, a small Inuvialuit settlement located on the shores of the Beaufort Sea in Canada's Northwest Territories, had endured Arctic winters for generations. The community of approximately 900 residents represented one of the northernmost permanent settlements in North America, where traditional subsistence hunting remained essential for survival. In February 2025, climate change and its devastating effects on sea ice would bring unprecedented danger directly to their doorsteps. The village's location at 69 degrees north latitude placed it well within the traditional range of polar bears. These massive predators typically spent most of their time hunting seals on frozen ocean surfaces. However, unprecedented warming trends had dramatically reduced sea ice coverage throughout the Beaufort Sea, forcing these enormous carnivores to seek alternative food sources on land. Elder Aaron Ikaluk, a 62-year-old traditional hunter and respected community leader, had lived in Tuktoyaktuk his entire life and served as keeper of conventional knowledge about wildlife behavior and seasonal patterns. His family's storage shed, constructed from weathered plywood and reinforced with metal sheeting, contained several months' worth of preserved fish, seal meat, and other traditional foods, essential for surviving the harsh Arctic winter. The settlement had implemented various bear deterrent measures over the years, including elevated food storage platforms and electric fencing around critical areas. However, the increasing frequency of polar bear encounters had strained these defensive systems, particularly during years when sea ice formation was delayed or inadequate for normal hunting patterns. On February 18th, temperatures hovered near -30 degrees Celsius, with fierce Arctic winds creating dangerous wind chill conditions that kept most residents indoors during the pre-dawn hours. The extreme cold should have discouraged wildlife activity, but desperate hunger had driven at least one massive polar bear to venture into the village outskirts in search of sustenance. At approximately 4:30 a.m., residents near the village's eastern edge were awakened by the sounds of splintering wood and metallic crashes emanating from the area where several family storage sheds were located. The noises initially suggested structural collapse due to extreme cold, a common occurrence during severe weather events that could cause materials to become brittle and fail. However, the sounds intensified and were joined by distinctive growling and snuffling noises that immediately identified the source as a large predator. Aaron Ikaluk was among the first residents to recognize the gravity of the situation, quickly gathering emergency flares and metal pots while alerting his neighbors through the community radio network. The polar bear responsible for the disturbance was a massive adult male, weighing approximately 400 kilograms and measuring nearly 3 meters in length. The animal had spent weeks searching for food sources, as diminishing sea ice had prevented normal seal hunting activities. Starvation had made the bear increasingly bold and willing to venture into human settlements despite its natural wariness. The bear had successfully breached Aaron's storage shed by tearing through the wooden siding with its powerful claws, each measuring over 8 centimeters in length. Once inside, the animal began systematically destroying containers and consuming preserved fish and seal meat that represented months of careful preparation for winter survival. Children throughout the affected neighborhood began crying and screaming as parents attempted to maintain calm while developing response strategies. The community's sled dogs, normally reliable guardians against wildlife intrusions, remained huddled in their shelters, instinctively avoiding confrontation with such a formidable predator. Aaron emerged from his home carrying emergency flares and began the dangerous process of attempting to drive the bear away from residential areas. He ignited several flares simultaneously, creating bright red illumination against the pre-dawn darkness while banging metal pots together to generate noise. His actions were supported by other community members who emerged from their homes with similar deterrent tools. The polar bear initially ignored these efforts, continuing to feed on the accessible food supplies, while occasionally looking toward the gathering humans with apparent curiosity rather than fear. The animal's behavior suggested habituation to human presence, a particularly dangerous development that increased the risk of aggressive encounters. The standoff continued for nearly 15 minutes as more residents joined the effort to discourage the bear's presence. Parents formed protective barriers around children, while others worked to secure additional food storage areas that might attract continued attention. The community's coordinated response reflected generations of experience dealing with dangerous Arctic wildlife. The bear finally began retreating when the village's generator-powered emergency siren was activated, creating a sustained, high-pitched wail that apparently exceeded the animal's tolerance levels. The massive predator abandoned its feeding activities and moved slowly toward the tundra, occasionally looking back toward the village before disappearing into the darkness. No residents suffered physical injuries during the encounter, but the psychological impact was significant, particularly for children who had never experienced such close contact with a polar bear. The incident destroyed several months' worth of traditional food supplies, creating serious concerns about winter nutrition for affected families. Community leaders promptly initiated enhanced security measures, including improved storage facilities and early warning systems to mitigate future wildlife encounters. The incident highlighted the growing challenges facing Arctic communities, as climate change continued altering traditional patterns of wildlife behavior. The aftermath of the encounter revealed the full extent of the bear's destructive capabilities. Aaron's storage shed had been completely demolished, with wooden walls splintered and metal reinforcements bent beyond recognition. Traditional preservation methods that had sustained his family through countless Arctic winters lay scattered across the frozen ground, much of it contaminated and unusable. Wildlife officials from Yellowknife arrived 3 days later to assess the situation and provide guidance for preventing future encounters. Their investigation revealed that this particular bear had likely traveled over 150 kilometers inland from its normal hunting grounds, following river systems and traditional travel corridors that connected coastal areas to interior regions. The scientific team's analysis of tracks and scat samples confirmed that the animal had been surviving primarily on scavenged materials and vegetation for several weeks, indicating severe nutritional stress. Polar bears required enormous quantities of fat-rich seal meat to maintain their massive body weight, and extended periods without proper nutrition could trigger increasingly desperate behavior patterns. Environmental data collected throughout the region showed that sea ice formation had been delayed by nearly 6 weeks compared to historical averages, preventing bears from accessing their primary hunting grounds during critical feeding periods. This disruption to natural cycles had created a cascade of problems affecting not only individual animals, but entire ecosystem relationships. Community meetings held in the weeks following the incident focused on developing comprehensive response strategies for future wildlife encounters. Traditional knowledge holders, such as Aaron, shared detailed information about historical bear behavior patterns, while younger residents contributed modern communication technologies and early warning systems. The economic impact of the incident extended far beyond the immediate food losses. Traditional hunting and preservation activities required months of careful planning and execution, making replacement of destroyed supplies extremely difficult during the winter months. Community support networks were activated to share resources among affected families, demonstrating the resilience of traditional social structures. Regional climate scientists used the incident to illustrate broader environmental changes affecting Arctic regions worldwide. Their research indicated that similar encounters would become increasingly common as warming temperatures continued disrupting established wildlife migration patterns and habitat availability. Educational programs developed in response to the crisis emphasized the importance of maintaining traditional knowledge while adapting to changing environmental conditions. Children learned about wildlife safety protocols while also gaining a deeper appreciation for the complex relationships between human communities and Arctic ecosystems. The village's response to media attention from southern Canada highlighted its need for increased government support in addressing climate-related challenges. Community representatives emphasized that Arctic residents were experiencing the most severe impacts of global environmental changes, despite having contributed the least to the underlying causes of these changes. The Altai Mountains of eastern Kazakhstan spanned a vast wilderness, where traditional pastoral life had remained virtually unchanged for centuries. In August 2024, the remote Zhetisu region, located approximately 200 kilometers southeast of Almaty, was home to nomadic herders who moved their livestock seasonally between mountain pastures and valley grazing areas. This ancient way of life would face a deadly challenge when climate pressures forced dangerous predators into direct conflict with human communities. The area had experienced its worst drought in over 30 years, with precipitation levels dropping to less than 40% of normal seasonal averages. Rivers that typically provided reliable water sources had dwindled to muddy trickles, while traditional berry patches and root vegetables that sustained wildlife populations had largely withered away. These conditions created desperate circumstances for the region's brown bear population, forcing them to seek alternative food sources. Beksut Nurmagomedov, a 47-year-old herder from a family that had worked these mountain pastures for 5 generations, maintained a modest operation consisting of approximately 60 cattle and twice as many sheep and goats. His traditional lifestyle required constant vigilance against natural predators, but recent environmental changes had dramatically increased the frequency and intensity of wildlife encounters. The Nurmagomedov family's summer grazing area was situated in a high valley surrounded by steep ridges covered in pine and birch forests. During normal years, this location provided excellent protection from harsh weather, offering abundant grass and access to nearby mountain streams. However, the severe drought had transformed the usually lush valley into a parched landscape where livestock competed desperately for limited resources. Beksut's cattle pens were constructed using traditional methods, with wooden posts and rails that provided adequate protection against wolves and smaller predators. However, they were never designed to contain or exclude animals weighing several hundred kilograms. The structures surrounded natural depressions where cattle gathered during nighttime hours, offering some protection from wind and weather. On August 26th, dawn broke with temperatures already approaching 30 degrees Celsius, promising another scorching day that would stress both livestock and wildlife populations. Beksut began his daily routine of inspecting the fencing and checking on newborn calves, which were particularly vulnerable to predation under these difficult conditions. At approximately 6:15 a.m., while Beksut was examining a section of damaged fencing near the main cattle enclosure, a massive brown bear emerged from the forest approximately 100 meters uphill from the ranch buildings. The animal, weighing an estimated 280 kilograms, moved with the deliberate purpose of a predator that had identified potential prey. The bear's initial approach was cautious but determined, suggesting previous experience with livestock predation. Its massive frame and powerful build indicated a mature male that had likely survived multiple encounters with humans and had learned to associate cattle operations with accessible food sources. The first indication of trouble came when the cattle began showing signs of extreme agitation, clustering together and producing distressed vocalizations that immediately alerted Beksut to the presence of danger. His experience as a traditional herder had taught him to recognize these warning signs, prompting him to scan the surrounding area for potential threats. Upon spotting the approaching bear, Bexat grabbed a wooden staff that he typically used for guiding livestock and positioned himself between the predator and his cattle. His actions were guided by generations of traditional knowledge about wildlife behavior, but this particular encounter would test the limits of conventional deterrent methods. The bear's response to human presence differed dramatically from typical wildlife behavior. Rather than retreating when confronted, the animal continued its approach and began testing the integrity of the wooden fencing that separated it from the cattle herd. Its powerful claws and massive weight made quick work of the traditional barriers. Cattle began panicking as the bear breached their enclosure, with adult animals attempting to protect calves while simultaneously seeking escape routes. The chaos created perfect hunting conditions for the predator, which immediately focused its attention on the smallest and most vulnerable animals present. Bexat decided to physically confront the bear using his wooden staff, striking the animal across its shoulders and head in an attempt to drive it away from the cattle. However, his traditional weapon proved inadequate against such a massive and determined predator. The bear's response was swift and devastating. The animal knocked Bexat to the ground with a single powerful swipe of its front paw, inflicting deep claw wounds across his back and shoulders. The injuries penetrated through his heavy clothing and into muscle tissue, creating painful but not immediately life-threatening trauma. Bexat's cries for help echoed across the valley as he attempted to crawl away from the attacking bear. Fellow herders from neighboring camps heard the commotion and responded quickly with rifles and additional deterrent tools. Their coordinated response included firing warning shots into the air and creating loud noises, which finally convinced the bear to abandon its attack and retreat into the forest. The encounter resulted in the deaths of 3 young calves and injuries to several adult cattle, representing significant economic losses for Bexat's family operation. More importantly, dozens of cattle were scattered across the mountainous terrain, requiring weeks of effort to locate and recover. Many animals were never found, presumably having fled too far into the wilderness to survive. Bexat received emergency medical treatment for his injuries, requiring multiple stitches and antibiotics to prevent infection from the bear's claws. His recovery took several months and left him with permanent scarring and reduced mobility in his left shoulder. The incident highlighted growing tensions between traditional pastoral communities and wildlife conservation efforts as drought conditions continued, forcing predators into increased contact with human activities. Regional authorities responding to the attack discovered evidence of similar encounters throughout the Altai region, suggesting that environmental pressures were creating widespread conflicts between wildlife and agricultural communities. Investigation of the attack site revealed that the responsible bear had been traveling extensively, with tracks and scat samples found across multiple valleys over a period of several weeks. Veterinary specialists examining the injured cattle determined that several animals would require extended treatment for claw wounds and bite injuries. The stress of the attack had also triggered premature births among pregnant cows, resulting in additional economic losses that would affect the Nurmagomedov family's income for years to come. Government compensation programs for wildlife-related livestock losses proved inadequate for covering the full extent of damages. Traditional herding families, such as the Nurmagomedovs, typically operated with minimal financial reserves, making recovery from such incidents particularly challenging. Community fundraising efforts provided some relief, but could not replace the specialized breeding stock that had been killed or permanently injured. Environmental scientists studying the drought's impact on regional ecosystems noted that brown bear populations were experiencing unprecedented nutritional stress. Traditional food sources, including fish runs, berry patches, and root vegetables, had largely disappeared, forcing normally solitary animals to venture into previously avoided areas in search of sustenance. The attack prompted emergency meetings between local government officials, conservation groups, and traditional herding communities. These discussions revealed fundamental conflicts between wildlife protection policies and the economic survival of pastoral families, who had maintained sustainable land use practices for generations. Bexat's recovery process required multiple trips to regional medical facilities, creating additional hardships for a family already struggling with livestock losses. Traditional healing practices supplemented modern medical treatment, but the combination of physical injuries and economic stress created lasting impacts on family stability. Neighboring herding families reported increased wildlife encounters throughout the remainder of the grazing season, including wolves and lynx that drought conditions had also displaced. The cascading effects of environmental change were creating multiple simultaneous challenges for communities that had previously maintained relatively stable relationships with local wildlife populations. Documentation of the incident by regional authorities contributed to growing recognition of climate change impacts on traditional livelihoods throughout Central Asia. The attack served as a case study for developing improved early warning systems and emergency response protocols for pastoral communities facing similar environmental pressures. Long-term monitoring programs established following the incident tracked both wildlife movements and livestock predation patterns throughout the Altai region. These efforts aimed to develop predictive models that could help herding families anticipate and prepare for periods of increased wildlife conflict based on environmental conditions and seasonal factors.